Commander Lisa Grant stood in the briefing room of the Starship Horizon and watched the holographic display show the purple planet below them, rotating slowly in the darkness of space. Admiral Carter sat at the head of the table with his weathered face showing every one of his 60 years and his eyes fixed on Lisa with an intensity that made her want to look away. But she held his gaze because that was what commanders did. "We need someone who can talk to them," he said, and his voice was rough, from too many years of shouting orders across command decks. "Someone who understands that we made mistakes and someone who can convince them that we want to fix those mistakes before this turns into a war that nobody wins." Lisa nodded and felt the weight of what he was asking settle onto her shoulders like a physical thing. The elves had been broadcasting warnings for 3 weeks now, ever since the incident with their scout ship, and their messages were clear and cold, and promised destruction if the human fleet did not leave their system immediately. But leaving meant abandoning 2 years of research, and it meant admitting defeat, and more importantly, it meant missing the chance to learn from a civilization that had mastered energy manipulation in ways that human science could barely understand. "How many people do I take with me?" Lisa asked, and Carter shook his head. "Just you," he said. They specified that in their last transmission, and they said any show of force would be treated as an act of war, and that includes armed escorts or security details. You go alone and unarmed and you meet with their queen in her palace, and you convince her that we are worth giving a chance. Lisa felt her pulse quicken because going alone into an alien palace without weapons or backup was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid, and she was not sure which category this fell into. The other officers around the table shifted in their seats, and Lieutenant Rodriguez, who had been Lisa's friend since their academy days, looked like he wanted to protest, but he kept his mouth shut because this was not the time for emotional objections. "What leverage do I have?" Lisa asked. "What can I offer them that they actually want?" Carter leaned back in his chair, and the holographic light made his face look even more tired than usual. "The truth," he said simply. "We tell them that we were wrong to enter their space without permission, and wrong to establish monitoring stations without asking, and wrong to fire on their scouts even if we thought they fired first. We admit our mistakes and we offer to make amends, and we hope that they value honesty more than they value revenge." Lisa thought about that for a moment and realized that it was both the simplest and the most difficult strategy possible, because admitting fault went against every instinct that had been drilled into her during 20 years of military service. "When do I leave?" she asked, and Carter glanced at the chronometer on the wall there. "Queen expects you in 6 hours," he said. "That gives you time to prepare and to say goodbye to anyone you need to say goodbye to, just in case things do not go according to plan." The unspoken words hung in the air between them, heavy with the possibility that Lisa might not come back from this meeting at all. The briefing ended, and Lisa made her way through the corridors of the Horizon, nodding to crew members who stepped aside to let her pass, and feeling the eyes of people who knew where she was going and what she was risking. She found Rodriguez waiting outside her quarters, and he fell into step beside her without saying anything at first. "You do not have to do this," he said finally, and his voice was quiet enough that only she could hear. "Carter, could send someone else, or we could try a different approach, or we could just leave like they want us to." Lisa stopped walking and turned to face him, and saw the concern in his eyes that went beyond professional worry into the territory of genuine friendship. "Someone has to go," she said, "and it might as well be someone who actually believes that we can fix this mess we created." Rodriguez looked like he wanted to argue, but he knew her well enough to understand that her mind was made up. "Just come back alive," he said. "That is an order from your friend, even if it is not an order from your commanding officer." Lisa smiled despite the tension coiled tight in her chest. "I will do my best," she promised. Inside her quarters, Lisa changed out of her uniform and into civilian clothes because the elves had made it clear that military displays would not be welcome. She chose simple pants and a shirt in neutral colors, and she left behind every piece of technology except for a basic communicator that would allow the ship to track her location. Her reflection in the mirror showed a woman in her late 30s with dark hair pulled back in a practical style, and eyes that had seen too many battles, but still held hope that peace was possible. She thought, about her family back on Earth, and about her mother who had always said that talking was harder than fighting, and about her father who had died in the border wars before humanity learned to unite. They would have understood what she was doing here, even if they would have worried about the danger. The 6 hours passed too quickly and too slowly at the same time, and before Lisa was ready, she found herself in the shuttle bay, being strapped into a small transport pod that would carry her down to the surface of the planet. The pilot was a young woman named Claire who looked nervous about the whole mission, but who checked every system twice to make sure nothing would go wrong during the descent. "Commander," she said as Lisa settled into the passenger seat, "good luck down there, and we will be monitoring everything and ready to extract you if things go bad." Lisa thanked her and tried not to think about all the ways that things could go bad or about the fact that extraction might not be possible if the elves decided they wanted her dead. The pod detached from the horizon with a gentle lurch and began its descent through the atmosphere of the planet that the elves called Shadow Reach. Through the viewport, Lisa could see clouds that glowed with purple light and mountain ranges that stretched higher than anything on Earth, and cities that sparkled like jewels scattered across the landscape. The beauty of it took her breath away and reminded her why humanity had come here in the first place, not to conquer or to steal, but to learn and to grow and to find their place in a universe that was far larger and stranger than they had ever imagined. The pod touched down in a landing area outside a massive palace that seemed to be carved from a single piece of crystal that caught the light and threw it back in rainbow patterns. Guards waited for her, and they were tall and elegant, and their armor seemed to be part of their bodies rather than something worn over them. Lisa stepped out of the pod and felt the alien gravity pull at her differently than Earth gravity, and smelled air that was sweet with unfamiliar flowers. One of the guards gestured for her to follow, and Lisa took a deep breath and walked forward into whatever fate awaited her, knowing that the next few hours would determine whether humanity found friends among the stars or enemies. The corridors of the Crystal Palace twisted in ways that made Lisa question whether she was walking on solid ground or floating through some kind of dream, and the walls seemed to shift and change when she was not looking directly at them. The guards led her deeper into the structure, and their footsteps made no sound on the smooth floor while Lisa's boots echoed with each step, marking her as an outsider in this place of silence and elegance. She tried to memorize the path they took in case she needed to find her way out quickly, but after the fifth impossible turn she gave up and accepted that she would have to trust these beings who had every reason to hate her and her kind. Through windows that appeared and disappeared, she caught glimpses of gardens filled with plants that moved on their own, and fountains where water flowed upward instead of down, and creatures that might have been birds or might have been something else entirely. The beauty was overwhelming, and Lisa felt a deep sadness knowing that her people had come to this world with weapons and suspicion instead of wonder and respect. Finally, they reached a set of doors that towered 3 times her height, and the guards stopped, and one of them spoke for the first time since they had met. "You will stand before Queen Valeria of the Shadow Reach, and you will speak only truth because she has lived longer than your civilization has existed, and she will know if you lie, and lying to her is the same as declaring war." The guard's voice was musical and cold at the same time, and Lisa nodded to show she understood even though her mouth had gone dry with fear. The doors opened without anyone touching them, and Lisa walked into a throne room carved from a single, massive emerald that filled the space with green light. At the far end of the room, on a throne that seemed to grow from the floor itself, sat a figure that took Lisa's breath away. Queen Valeria was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at because she was both young and ancient at once, with silver hair that moved like living water, and skin that glowed with its own light, and eyes that held the depth of centuries. But what made Lisa stop walking for a moment were the 2 dragons coiled at the queen's feet like enormous cats. The dragons were nothing like the monsters from Earth legends because their scales shifted colors with each breath, moving through shades of blue and red and purple and gold, and their eyes held intelligence that was unmistakable. One dragon lifted its head to watch Lisa approach, and its gaze felt like being examined under a microscope, where every thought and feeling was laid bare. Lisa forced herself to keep walking until she stood at a respectful distance from the throne, and then she bowed because that seemed appropriate, even though humans had long ago stopped bowing to rulers. Queen Valeria studied her in silence for what felt like an eternity, and Lisa kept her head down and waited for permission to speak. "You are the one they sent," the Queen said finally, and her voice carried power that made the air vibrate. "The human who comes alone and unarmed to face me after your people violated my territory and killed my subjects." Lisa straightened and met the Queen's eyes because hiding would accomplish nothing. "I am Commander Lisa Grant of the Earth Alliance," she said, and her voice sounded small in the vast room. "I have come to discuss peace between our peoples and to acknowledge the mistakes we have made." The dragon on the Queen's right made a sound that was part growl and part musical note, and its scales shifted from blue to deep red. "Mistakes," Valeria repeated, and the word dripped with contempt. "Is that what you call entering my system without permission, and taking samples from my moons without asking, and establishing spy stations near my capital world, and firing upon my scouts when they investigated your presence?" Lisa felt sweat forming on her back, despite the cool air, because the Queen knew far more than the intelligence reports had suggested. "We believed we were being careful," she said, and immediately regretted the words because they sounded like an excuse. The Queen's expression did not change, but something flickered in her eyes that might have been anger, or might have been disappointment. "You believed you were being careful," she said. "How remarkably human to think that your intentions matter more than your actions." The dragon on the left uncoiled slightly, and Lisa saw that its wings were covered in patterns that looked like star charts. "This is Ember," the Queen said, gesturing to the red dragon, "and this is Storm," she added, indicating the blue one. "They are not pets or servants, but partners who have chosen to bond with me, and they can sense things that your technology cannot measure. Ember says you are afraid but not of dying, and Storm says you carry guilt that weighs heavier than any weapon." Lisa felt exposed under their gaze, but she did not look away, because she had come here for honesty. "Not for games. Your dragons are right," she said. "I am afraid that my people will start a war we cannot win, and I carry guilt, because I was part of the command structure that made the decisions that brought us to this point. I cannot undo what has been done, but I can try to make sure we do not make the same mistakes again." Valeria leaned forward slightly, and her silver hair fell across her shoulders like liquid moonlight. "Why should I believe that you are different from the others?" she asked. 600 cycles I have ruled this world, and in that time I have watched 23 different species come to our system, and every single one of them spoke words of peace and cooperation, and every single one of them eventually showed their true nature. They tried to steal our resources or study us like laboratory specimens, or convert us to their beliefs or conquer us outright, and each time we had to drive them away with force. What makes your people any different from those who came before? Lisa thought about that question and realized that she could not promise that humans were better than those other species, because humanity's history was filled with conquest and exploitation and war, but she could offer something else. "We are not different," she said simply. "My people have done terrible things to each other and to our own world, and we carry the same capacity for violence and greed that every intelligent species seems to carry. But we also have something else, and we have the capacity to learn from our mistakes and to change and to grow." Lisa took a breath and continued speaking from her heart rather than from any diplomatic training. 100 years ago, my people were divided into nations that fought constant wars over territory and resources and beliefs, and we came very close to destroying ourselves multiple times with weapons that could have ended all life on our world. But we survived, because enough of us chose cooperation over conquest and chose to see former enemies as potential friends. It was not easy, and it did not happen quickly, and there are still humans who resist that change, but we are trying to be better than we were. The Queen listened without interrupting, and the dragons watched with their color-shifting scales moving through patterns that Lisa could not interpret. Valeria finally spoke, and her voice was quieter than before. "Pretty words," she said. "But I have heard pretty words before, and words cost nothing while actions cost everything. My sister Kira rules the Northern Territories, and 3 weeks ago your ships fired upon one of her scout vessels, and 2 of her people died in that attack, and their families grieve and demand justice. How do your pretty words bring them back or ease their pain?" Lisa felt the weight of those deaths settle on her shoulders, because she had read the report and had argued against the official version that claimed the elves fired first. "I cannot bring them back," she said, and her voice was rough with emotion. "Their deaths are on us, and I am sorry does not begin to cover the loss, but I can promise that the humans responsible will face consequences, and I can promise that we will honor their memory by making sure such violence does not happen again. I have the authority to order our fleet to remove all unauthorized equipment and to withdraw to a respectful distance and to establish proper diplomatic channels before any further contact." The dragon, named Ember, lifted its head and made a sound that was almost like speech, and the queen reached down to touch its scales. Queen Valeria stood from her throne, and Lisa realized just how tall she was because the elf ruler towered over her by nearly a full foot, and her presence seemed to fill the entire emerald chamber. "Ember says, 'You speak truth,'" the queen said, and her tone had shifted from cold contempt to something more curious. "Storm says your heart beats with genuine regret, and not the false remorse of someone caught in wrongdoing. These observations interest me, because in 600 cycles I have met few beings who could stand before my bonded dragons and maintain such clarity of emotion." Lisa felt a flutter of hope in her chest, but she pushed it down because hope could be dangerous when dealing with someone who had every reason to want her dead. Queen began to walk, and the dragons uncoiled from their resting positions and followed her with movements that were both serpentine and graceful. Lisa understood without being told that she was expected to walk as well, and she fell into step beside Valeria, though she made sure to keep a respectful distance. "Tell me about your world," the queen said as they walked through corridors that seemed to form ahead of them and dissolve behind them. "Tell me what drives humans to reach across the stars, when you have barely learned to live peacefully on your own planet." Lisa thought carefully about how to answer because she sensed that this was a test of some kind. "We reach for the stars because we are curious," she said, "because we look up at the night sky and wonder what else is out there, and because we hope to find others who can teach us things we have not yet imagined. But you are right, that we have not perfected peace on our own world. And maybe that is why we need to meet others, because seeing different ways of living helps us understand our own flaws." The queen led them into a garden that should not have existed inside a crystal palace, but there it was, with trees that had silver leaves and flowers that sang soft notes when the wind touched them. "Curiosity," Valeria repeated as if tasting the word. "That is what the Corthan said when they came 5 cycles ago, and they were curious about our energy manipulation techniques, so we agreed to share some basic knowledge, and within a year they had weaponized what we taught them and tried to use it against us. We drove them from our system, and now they are extinct, because they turned their weapons on each other when they could not defeat us." Lisa felt a chill run down her spine, because that story could easily become humanity's story if they were not careful. The dragon storm moved ahead of them and settled near a fountain where water flowed in spirals that defied gravity, and the creature dipped its head to drink. "How do you bond with them?" Lisa asked, because the question had been burning in her mind since she first saw the dragons. "How do beings so different choose to become partners?" Valeria smiled for the first time since Lisa had entered the throne room, and the expression transformed her face from severe to almost kind. "Dragons choose us, not the other way around," she said. "When an elf reaches their coming of age at 50 cycles, they enter the deep caves where dragons nest, and if a dragon senses compatibility, it will offer the bond. The bond is telepathic and empathic, and once formed it cannot be broken except by death, and when one partner dies, the other often follows within days because the emptiness is too great to bear." She walked to Storm and placed her hand on the dragon's neck, and the scales shifted to a gentle purple color. "I bonded with Storm when I was 50 cycles old, and Ember found me 20 cycles later, which is rare because most elves bond with only one dragon in their lifetime. They know my thoughts and I know theirs, and together we are stronger than any of us could be. Alone." Lisa watched the obvious affection between the queen and her dragons and felt a pang of envy, because humans had nothing comparable in their experience. "Do they speak?" she asked. Storm lifted his head and looked directly at Lisa, and suddenly she heard a voice in her mind that was neither male nor female, but something entirely other. "We speak, but not as you understand." Speaking, the voice said, and Lisa stumbled backward in shock. We share thoughts and emotions and concepts that have no words in your limited languages. Valeria caught Lisa's arm to steady her, and there was amusement in her eyes. Storm rarely speaks to those outside our people, she said. You should consider it an honor, even if it startled you. Lisa tried to calm her racing heart and looked at the dragon with new understanding. Thank you, she said out loud, and then felt foolish. Because if the dragon could put thoughts in her mind, surely it could hear her thoughts as well. Storm's scales rippled with colors that might have been laughter, and the dragon returned to drinking from the impossible fountain. The queen released Lisa's arm and continued walking through the garden. You asked how we bond with dragons, she said. But you should understand that the bond is not ownership or control. Dragons are fully sentient beings with their own desires and goals, and they choose to work with us because our partnership benefits both species. Elves provide dragons with intellectual stimulation and magical enhancement, while dragons provide elves with physical protection and expanded perception. It is cooperation based on mutual respect and understanding. Lisa thought about the relationships between humans and the animals they had domesticated over millennia, and realized that those were nothing like what the queen described. We have nothing like that on Earth, she admitted. The closest we have are bonds with creatures called dogs who work with us and seem to love us, but they are not our equals, and we do not share thoughts with them. Valeria nodded as if this confirmed something she had suspected. That is the difference between domination and partnership. She said, your people see other beings as resources to be used or obstacles to be overcome, and that is why you came to our system with the assumption that you could take what you wanted. You did not think to ask because you did not see us as equals, but as subjects for study or potential threats to be monitored. The words stung because they were true, and Lisa could not deny the accusation. You are right, she said quietly. We approached your world the way we have approached everything in our history, as something to be conquered or controlled. But some of us are trying to change that, and some of us understand that the universe is too big and too complex for any one species to dominate. We want to learn how to be partners instead of conquerors, even if we are clumsy at it. Ember approached them, and the red dragon moved with surprising grace for something so large, and its scales glowed like heated metal in the strange light of the garden. The dragon circled Lisa once, and she felt that same sensation of being examined from the inside out. Finally, Ember made a sound that was almost like purring and settled down near them. Ember says you have potential. The queen translated, that you carry both the old human patterns of conquest and the new human dreams of cooperation, and that the struggle between these two forces defines your species. Lisa looked at the dragon and wondered what it saw when it looked at her soul, because she had never thought of herself as representing anything larger than her own choices. Queen Valeria sat on a bench carved from living wood that had grown into the shape of a seat and gestured for Lisa to sit as well. I will tell you something that few outsiders know, she said. Our people were not always peaceful, and 2,000 cycles ago we nearly destroyed ourselves in a civil war that split our world between 5 factions, each believing they alone understood the proper way to live. We fought with weapons and magic, and we poisoned our land and killed millions, and the war only ended when the dragons intervened. They refused to bond with any elves until we made peace, and without dragons our society could not function, because so much of our technology and magic depends on the partnership. We were forced to learn cooperation or face extinction. And we chose cooperation, and it took 500 cycles to truly heal the wounds we had inflicted on ourselves. Lisa listened with growing understanding, because this was exactly the kind of story humanity needed to hear. So you understand what we are going through. She said, you know what it is like to stand at the edge of self-destruction and have to choose a different path. Valeria met her eyes, and Lisa saw the weight of centuries in that gaze. Yes, the queen said. I understand. And that is why I am willing to give your people a chance when by all rights I should simply drive you from our system and warn all neighboring civilizations to avoid contact with humanity. But understanding is not the same as trust, and trust must be earned through consistent action over time, not through pretty speeches in a palace garden. The garden disappeared around them, and suddenly Lisa found herself standing in a different room entirely. and she had not felt any transition or movement, which meant the Queen had powers that went far beyond anything human science could explain. This chamber was smaller and more intimate, with walls that showed moving images of star systems and planets and what looked like historical records playing out in silent detail. "These are memories," the Queen said, gesturing to the walls. "My memories and the memories of my ancestors passed down through generations so that we never forget the lessons we learned through pain and blood." Lisa watched as one wall showed elves fighting elves with weapons that tore reality itself, and cities burning with fire that consumed stone and metal equally. "That is the Civil War I mentioned," Valeria said, and her voice carried the weight of old grief. "My grandmother's grandmother lived through those times, and her memories became part of our collective history, so that we would always remember what pride and arrogance cost us." Another section of wall showed different aliens arriving at the elf world, and Lisa watched as first contact scenarios played out over and over with varying results. Some encounters ended peacefully with trade and cultural exchange, while others descended into violence and betrayal. "The Corthan, who I mentioned earlier," the Queen said, pointing to one particularly brutal sequence. "They seemed friendly at first, and we taught them our ways with energy manipulation, and they took that knowledge and tried to use it to enslave us. We had no choice but to defend ourselves, and in doing so we destroyed their entire expeditionary fleet. When they returned home and tried to use their stolen knowledge against their own political rivals, they created weapons they could not control, and their homeworld burned." Lisa felt sick watching the destruction, because it was a warning of what could happen to humanity if they made the same mistakes. "How many species have you encountered?" she asked. 23, as I said earlier," the Queen replied. 15 were peaceful enough, though most eventually left our system when they realized we would not share our most advanced knowledge with. Outsiders 5 were hostile from the beginning, and we drove them away before they could establish a foothold. 3, like the Corthan, seemed peaceful but proved treacherous, and we destroyed them before they could harm us. The numbers were sobering, because they suggested that genuine peaceful contact was far rarer than hostile or failed encounters. "Where does humanity fall in those categories?" Lisa asked. "We have not decided yet," Valeria said, and turned to face her directly. "That is why you are here. And that is why I agreed to this meeting when my advisors urged me to simply destroy your fleet and be done with it. Ember and Storm both believe you are sincere, but sincerity is not enough, because sincere people can still cause great harm through ignorance or weakness." The dragon Ember moved closer, and Lisa felt heat radiating from its scales like standing near a furnace. The dragon's eyes were like molten gold, and they seemed to see through all her defenses. "You fear failure more than death," Ember's voice said in Lisa's mind. "You carry the weight of your people's history, and you want desperately to prove that humans can be different from what their past suggests. But wanting is not the same as doing, and doing requires sacrifice and pain and the willingness to change everything about how you see the universe." Lisa found her voice after a moment of stunned silence. "You are right," she said, speaking both out loud and in her thoughts. "I do fear failure, because if I fail here, then my people might lose their last chance to join the galactic community as partners instead of parasites or conquerors. But I am willing to do whatever it takes to earn your trust, even if it means going against my own government or facing consequences." When I returned to my ship, Storm's voice joined Ember's in her mind, and it was cooler and more analytical. "Your government sent you here to negotiate, but what they want is access to our technology and our knowledge. They speak of peace, but they dream of power, and they believe that if they can learn our secrets, they can use them to dominate this region of space. How will you reconcile what they want with what we require?" The question hit Lisa like a physical blow, because Storm had identified the fundamental problem at the heart of this entire mission. Admiral Carter wanted peace, but he also wanted humanity to gain advantages from contact with the elves, and those two goals were not necessarily compatible. "I cannot reconcile them," Lisa admitted. "If you demand that we give up our desire for your knowledge, then I will have to tell my superiors that the price of peace is accepting our own limitations, and some of them will not want to pay that price. But I believe that genuine partnership is More valuable than stolen secrets because partnership means you might choose to share knowledge when you believe we are ready, while stealing means we would learn things we are not mature enough to handle. Safely, Valeria studied Lisa for a long moment, and something shifted in her expression. "That is perhaps the wisest thing you have said since arriving here," she said. "Most species do not understand that knowledge without wisdom is dangerous, and that true advancement comes not from acquiring new tools but from developing the character to use tools responsibly." The walls around them changed to show a beautiful city, with towers that reached toward the sky, and technology that seemed like magic. "This is our capital city," the Queen said. "We have energy sources that could power your entire civilization for millennia, and we have medical techniques that could eliminate most human diseases, and we have methods of space travel that make your ships look like primitive rafts, but we do not share these things freely because we have learned that giving advanced technology to immature civilizations is like giving weapons to children." The image shifted to show destruction, and Lisa understood that this was what had happened when the elves had been less cautious in the past. "So what do you want from us?" Lisa asked. "If you will not share your knowledge and you do not want our presence in your system, then what is the point of this meeting?" The Queen smiled, and it was not entirely kind. "Want to see if humans are capable of growth," she said. "I want to see if you can accept being the students instead of the masters, and if you can show patience and humility instead of demanding immediate results. If you can do these things, then perhaps, in time we might teach you what you wish to know. But if you cannot, then it is better we discover that now before we invest hope in a species that is not ready." Lisa felt the challenge in those words and understood that this was the real test. The Queen was not asking for promises or treaties, but for fundamental change in how humanity approached the universe. "Can you give us time?" she asked. "Can you allow us to prove ourselves through actions instead of words?" "That depends on what actions you propose," Valeria replied. The Queen walked to a table that had not been there a moment before and gestured for Lisa to join her. On the table was a three-dimensional map showing the star system with the human fleet marked in red and various elf installations marked in blue. "Your ships are here," she said, pointing to the positions, "and your unauthorized monitoring stations are here and here and here. The first action I require is the immediate removal of all monitoring equipment and the withdrawal of your fleet to this position beyond the outer asteroid belt." Lisa studied the map and realized that the position the Queen indicated would put the human ships days away from the planet instead of hours. "That will be difficult to sell to my admiral," she said honestly. "He will worry that we are vulnerable if we are so far from support." "Then your admiral does not trust that we are negotiating in good faith," Valeria said, "which suggests that perhaps he should not be the one making decisions about this." Contact Lisa felt trapped between loyalty to her command structure and the demands of a situation that required more flexibility than military hierarchy usually allowed. "I will recommend it," she said finally, "and I will argue that showing trust is the only way to build trust, even if it means accepting vulnerability." The Queen nodded as if this was the answer she expected. "The second action I require is that you remain here," she said, "not as a prisoner, but as an ambassador, and as a student you will live in our city and learn our ways and report back to your ship what you observe and experience. If your people can accept having their representative embedded in our culture, then it suggests they are serious about building real relationships." Lisa felt her heart race because this was far more than she had expected to be asked. "For how long?" she asked. "Until both of us agree that enough trust has been built," the Queen replied. "It might be months, or it might be cycles, but it will take as long as it takes." Storm moved closer and his scales had shifted to a deep blue that reminded Lisa of Earth's oceans. The dragon's voice in her mind was gentle. "You fear that your people will forget you, or that they will make decisions without your input, but this fear is part of what must be overcome because true partnership requires vulnerability and patience." Lisa looked at the map and then at the Queen, and at the two dragons who watched her with ancient eyes. She thought about Rodriguez and Admiral Carter and all the crew members who were counting on her to find a way forward, and she thought about humanity's long history of making first contact mistakes and about whether she had the courage to try something different. "I accept," she said, and her voice was steady, despite the fear churning in her stomach. I will stay and learn and report what I discover, and I will trust that my people will honor this arrangement even when it becomes difficult. Queen Valeria allowed Lisa to send one transmission back to the horizon, and Lisa stood in a communication chamber, while the Queen and both dragons watched her compose her message to Admiral Carter. She chose her words carefully because she knew that what she said now would determine whether her people accepted this arrangement or attempted some kind of rescue operation that would destroy everything she had tried to build. Admiral Carter. She began, I have met with Queen Valeria and her bonded dragons, and we have reached an initial agreement that I believe gives us a real chance at establishing peaceful relations with the elves. The terms are these, and our fleet must withdraw to coordinates that I am transmitting separately, and all monitoring stations must be dismantled within 48 hours. I will remain here as an ambassador and student to learn their culture and report my observations back to you. This arrangement is not imprisonment, but rather the foundation of trust building between our peoples. She paused and took a breath before continuing. I know this is not what we hoped for when we entered this system, and I know it requires us to accept vulnerability and patience. But I have seen enough here to believe that the elves have knowledge and wisdom that could help humanity avoid the mistakes that have destroyed other species. They are not hostile, but they are cautious because they have been betrayed before, and we must prove through consistent action that we are different. I'm asking you to trust my judgment and to support this agreement even though it means accepting conditions we did not anticipate. Lisa out. The transmission ended, and Lisa felt the weight of what she had just committed herself to, because there was no going back now. The Queen nodded with approval. That was well said, she observed. You did not hide the difficulty of what you are asking, and you did not make promises you cannot keep. Now we wait to see if your admiral has the wisdom to accept what you have offered. The next hours were tense because Lisa had no way of knowing how Carter would respond, and whether the human fleet would honor her agreement. Valeria provided her with quarters in a tower that overlooked the capital city, and Lisa stood at the window watching the alien sky turn colors that had no names in human languages. The city below was alive with lights and movement, and she could see elves going about their lives with dragons flying overhead in graceful patterns. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time because she was so far from anything familiar and so dependent on beings she barely understood. A soft chime announced a visitor, and Lisa turned to find a young elf standing in her doorway. The elf was female, with the same silver hair as the Queen, though her eyes held only decades rather than centuries. My name is Kira, she said, and her voice carried a musical quality that made Lisa think of wind chimes. I am the Queen's niece, and I have been assigned to be your guide and teacher during your time here. Also, I am the sister of one of the scouts your people killed, and I volunteered for this duty because I want to understand the beings who took my brother from me. Lisa felt her stomach drop because this was exactly the kind of complication she had feared. I am so sorry for your loss, she said, and the words felt inadequate. I cannot undo what happened, but I will do everything in my power to make sure such violence does not happen again. Kira studied her with eyes that were hard but not cruel. My brother's name was Aldrin, and he was 200 cycles old, and he loved studying the stars, and he believed that all beings in the universe were connected through invisible threads of fate. When your ships fired on his vessel, he had time to send one message back to me, and he said that he did not blame the humans because he believed they were acting out of fear rather than malice. He asked me to remember that fear can be overcome with understanding. Lisa felt tears sting her eyes because the grace of that final message made the loss even more painful. Your brother sounds like he was a wise person, she said. Kira's expression softened slightly. He was, she agreed, and because he asked me to try understanding. I will teach you what I can, and you will tell me about your people, and together we will see if his faith in the possibility of peace was justified. Over the following weeks, Lisa began to learn the ways of the elves and discovered that their society was built on principles that were both familiar and completely alien to human thinking. They valued patience above speed and cooperation above competition, and they saw themselves not as individuals, but as parts of a larger whole that included their dragons and their world, and the cosmic forces they had learned to work with. Kira taught her the basics of the elf language, which had more words for different types of light than human languages had for emotions. She explained how their energy manipulation worked through harmony with natural forces rather than domination of them. And she showed Lisa the deep caves where dragons nested and where young elves went to seek bonds that would define the rest of their lives. One day they stood at the edge of a cave entrance and Lisa could feel heat and power radiating from the darkness below. "What happens if a dragon does not choose you?" Lisa asked. "Then you return the next year and try again." Kira said, "Some elves bond on their first visit, and others take decades to find their match. A few never bond at all and they become scholars or artisans and find other ways to serve our society. But those who bond with dragons experience a connection that transforms them, because suddenly you are never alone. In your own mind and your emotions are shared, and your thoughts are witnessed. It is beautiful and terrifying." Lisa tried to imagine what that would be like and found she could not quite grasp it, because humans were so used to the privacy of their own minds. "Do you have a dragon?" she asked. "Not yet," Kira said, and there was longing in her voice. "I have come here 5 times since reaching my coming of age, and each time the dragons have observed me, but none have offered the bond. My aunt says it is because I carry too much anger about my brother's death and that dragons can sense that the anger would poison the connection. So I must learn to let go of my rage before I can move forward." Lisa felt the parallel between them because she too carried anger about all the ways humanity had failed and about all the opportunities they had wasted through arrogance and fear. "Maybe we can learn to let go together," she said. Kira looked at her with surprise and then with something that might have been the beginning of friendship. "Perhaps we can," she agreed. Back in the city, Lisa sent regular reports to Admiral Carter describing what she was learning and carefully avoiding anything that could be considered military intelligence because she understood that trust required restraint. Carter's responses were terse at first because he was clearly uncomfortable with the arrangement, but gradually his messages became more supportive as he saw that Lisa was gaining genuine insights into elf culture. The human fleet had withdrawn to the position the Queen demanded and had dismantled all the monitoring stations. Though Lisa knew that some of the officers were deeply unhappy about giving up their tactical advantages, but there had been no incidents and no violence, and slowly the tension between the two species began to ease. One evening, 3 months after Lisa's arrival, Queen Valeria summoned her to the throne room again. This time there were no guards and no formal ceremony, but rather a casual meeting between two beings who had begun to understand each other. "You have done well," Valeria said. "Kira reports that you are a dedicated student, and the council has noticed that you ask questions but do not demand answers. You observe but do not judge, and you share information about your people without hiding their flaws." Lisa bowed slightly because she had learned that the gesture carried meaning beyond simple respect. "I have tried to be worthy of the chance you gave me," she said. The Queen gestured for her to sit, and they settled into chairs that had been arranged near the windows overlooking the city storm. And Ember were present as always, and their scales glowed softly in the dim light. "I have decided to make you an offer," Valeria said. "Your people may establish a permanent embassy here, and may send scholars and diplomats to learn our ways. In return, we will send observers to your ships and eventually to your home world, so that we can understand you as well. This will not be a quick process, and it will take generations before we are ready to share our deepest knowledge with you. But it is a beginning." Lisa felt hope surge in her chest, because this was more than she had dared to dream on behalf of humanity. "I accept," she said, "and I promise that we will honor this opportunity and prove ourselves worthy of your trust." The Queen smiled, and it was a genuine expression of warmth. "Time will tell," she said. "But for now we have taken the first steps, and that is enough." As Lisa looked out over the alien city with its impossible architecture and its dragons flying through purple skies, she thought about how far she had come from that day when she stepped out of the transport pod. Not knowing if she would survive the meeting, she thought about Kira teaching her to see the universe through elf eyes, and about the patient wisdom of dragons who could sense truth beneath words. And she thought about humanity standing at a crossroads between its violent past and a possible future. where cooperation replaced conquest. The path forward would not be easy, and there would be setbacks and challenges and moments when the fragile trust they were building would be tested. But for the first time since humans had reached for the stars, Lisa believed that they might actually succeed in becoming the species they had always hoped to be.